Welcome to the Rotary Club of Bearden. We'd like to welcome all visiting Rotarians and guests. Also, that we're going to ask that you turn off your cell phone. To lead us in the song, we have the legendary Janice Mitchell.
Did you say legendary again?
Well, I got to kind of come. When I'm on camera, I got to make it look good.
Okay.
Wait till next week.
So we're going to sing "Oh Beautiful for Spacious Skies" and "Amber Waves of Rain." Amber Waves of Grain. And so I'm going to give you a pitch, and this is the pitch, and I hope you will all adhere to the pitch and don't sing off on your own. Ready? Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Thank you.
Thanks, Janice. To lead us in the pledge, we've got Mr. Ryan Messer.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Steve Chansey, can you lead us in invocation?
Yeah. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful day, this Rotary Day. Please bless this Rotary Club and the efforts that we have to serve our community. Help us also as we build and create better and newer friendships within Rotary. You blessed us in many ways. We thank you for this country. Thank you for the great day, the great weather that we're having today as well. All these things in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And the man that puts all our speakers together and does an excellent job is going to announce our visitors and guests, David Lund.
Not sure I've ever done this before. Our
Don't screw up.
no visiting Rotarians, and for guests, you have a guest, Jim?
Well, and actually Doug's going to pass it on up.
Yeah, so Jim Christensen today. Jim, you want to stand up? He's former member, president. He has applied for membership, so hopefully we'll be hearing from him shortly. But Jim, thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you all.
Mike, you have a guest.
I do. Look at that. Mackenzie Bailey Kristowski, and she's carrying my wife Kim and our third grandson. Her first. Peter's the first. She's back from Alaska and many other places, New Zealand, Thailand, all the places she lives in 10 miles now. Log cabin on 30 acres with Mackenzie Bailey Kristowski.
Again, thank you guys.
Congratulations on the grandchildren, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Just to remind you, Jim Christensen's, he's now been proposed as a member, and he's been listed in the newsletter, so that's all I wanted to say. 2 or 3 announcements. First, Lorna gave me the card. If you're the Blount County Animal Welfare Society, if you recall, last month we did the wrapping of presents, and they just wanted to thank us. They sent us a letter that says, Dear Rotary Club, thank you for the hosting and sponsoring our wrapping fundraiser. We did quite well, and all of the dollars will be spent on our mission to improve animal lives in Blount County. Sincerely, Blount County volunteers. We raised, I think it was a little over $1,300. That was awesome. If I'd done the wrapping, we would have raised, they probably would have asked for a refund. It would have all come. Is Jim Burns here? ball board winners?
Yep, one left. I emailed it out yesterday. And then last week, or the last game, the Orange Bowl, the winners were Janice was halftime and Jim Kotsianis won the final. So this is the last one. Next week or whenever Jim lets me, I'll do a review of the year. And again, really appreciate everybody signing up for that. It's a nice little fundraiser we do, and I appreciate everybody participating.
Thanks, Jim. Janice, Mobile Mills, anything to report?
And I just want to say that because of us advertising and talking about our ball board, some of the other clubs in the Knoxville area are beginning to do that. And they had their first one, and they were very successful. And so thank y'all for participating every time you're asked to sign up for that. Mobile meals, we delivered 13 meals today. There were 2 that were not on there. One of them has had a mild heart attack. If Kelly was here, she would tell you that Miss Viola is one of our very favorite persons to accept mobile meals from us. If you would like to join in with mobile meals, let me know. We'll do a ride around, and then you are free to deliver yourself. And we do it every Friday, unless they tell us it's a holiday or something like that. So, oh, and one other little thing, we do deliver. We have a little library that was built for us, and by what's his name? He just had an operation. Jerry Eastman built it for us, and so we've been trying to find a place to locate it, trying to talk about Pond Gap School, and it's just, they're not there in the summer, and it's just a little hard. So we deliver mobile meals to the flats at Pond Gap. It's the new apartments right there. I met with them today. Their head people are coming in this afternoon, and they think they're going to let us put it there. And they have a lot of families that go to Pond Gap, so it will be a perfect place. So as soon as I know, I'll let you all know.
Thanks, Janice. I see Bruce Van Cleve, I don't believe is here, but just remind everybody, I guess is Pond Gap free?
Not today.
Not today, but starting next week, I think you would. So you'll need to sign up, and if you can do that, that'd be great. Starting, I think it starts next week, right, David?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks. And then to introduce anybody, well, I'll go ahead and hold that for you. David Loon to introduce our speaker.
I was going to say a bunch of stuff. I'm going to let him talk about himself. Our guest, we didn't have a speaker. I've been trying real hard to get this spot filled. And first of the year, it's tough to find anybody. So Alan Smeltzer volunteered or agreed to do it. Voluntold, which is great. We've been talking about doing some sort of technology vigilance, and so he's going to get up here and speak. And I was going to say all this stuff, but I think what he is known for most is solely getting the weekly joke thrown out that we can't tell it anymore. Please join me in welcoming Alan.
You shall all learn to regret this decision. And JP was the one who got us kicked out on humor, by the way. It was the movie joke, remember?
I did. I can tell it again if you want.
Does anyone remember in college having those things where you wake up and you feel like you've got a final, but you never went to class the whole time?
This is it.
A little history before I start talking here. Yeah, it was my understanding that someone went to the bowl game recently and ran up to Peyton Manning there. And Peyton was like, yeah, I'm going to be in town next week, and I'd love to speak at your Rotary Club. They called David Loon, and David was like, I've got Alan's schedule. Can you just call me back later? So thank David for this. So I didn't have anything particular to talk about. And by the way, this is actually more of a discussion. If anyone wants to ask questions, please interrupt me, because I put together some thoughts on information technology since I've been working in it. I've been working in it since the 80s, the first building PC clones back in the 80s. And I thought what I wanted to do was talk about modern security, but I think for me it's relevant to understand the history of how we got from there to here, because I don't know, I find it interesting. So we'll see if you guys do, but if anyone wants to chime in, feel free. There's no reason not to interrupt me. So I actually started working on PCs back in the 80s when I was in college at UT in electrical engineering. I started building PC clones. Back then, the personal computers that I used, were just standalone computers. If you were sharing information, you did it via SneakerNet, carry a floppy disk to someone else's computer. Now in college, we were using mainframes and all that stuff. And I'm going to get around to this in a minute, but it's interesting. Security was a big deal in mainframe worlds. They knew about it. They knew about passwords. They knew about limiting access and everything. And the PC world, it was just, well, here's a computer and just run it. There's no security in anything back then. In the early 90s, I started working on Novell networking, and that's where we first started doing some degree of security, where you would put in file system security. You'd have HR files and accounting files, and you'd set user permissions for who could get to what. And so that was kind of the start of setting up some computer and network security. We were still running DOS at the time. I'm going to assume people remember DOS before you had any kind of graphical anything, yeah. So that was what we were doing pretty much mostly through the 90s. Now, late in the 90s, Windows started to become a thing, but it really didn't happen. I mean, we were still literally running, I was running DOS computers and Novell networks all through the 90s. I was running Windows and playing with it, but it wasn't really a business application. So at that time, viruses really weren't much of a thing. You could somehow, like if someone gave you a floppy disk with a virus on it, you might could transmit it, but transmission was hard because there wasn't a lot of sharing data. You know what I mean? It was just standalone computers running things. Most people weren't sharing their accounting system. They had an accounting computer. So security was not a big deal for personal computers and networks back then because there really wasn't that much risk. In the early 2000s is when Windows XP came around. And that's kind of where, in my opinion, from my personal experience, that's kind of where the poo-poo hit the fan. A couple of things were going on. One, everyone was actually running Windows. Two, they had web browsers built into them. And three, people were starting to actually get internet on their computers. And you know how many people had any kind of training on what they should be doing? Goose egg. And you know what we all did as IT guys, and I like to sort of take some of the responsibility for this, but everyone in my business was doing it. Windows XP was kind of the first operating system we were working with that actually had the capability of building in security, user permissions, file system permissions, and all that. But everyone just wanted to be able to load stuff, do whatever they needed to on their computer. So all we did was make everyone a local administrator. I mean, from a practical standpoint, you could load Adobe, you could load whatever you needed. That's a good thing. You didn't have to call the IT guy every time you needed to do something, right? Yeah. Anyone remember how well that worked out for us? So that was basically the era where, and I'm sure you guys are going to remember this, but I like to bring back some old fun stuff. Does everyone remember the days of pop-ups and websites and of course malware? I mean, you go to a website and then all of a sudden ding, 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 and it would just keep popping up. Now pop-ups were never that big a deal because they sucked, but they were just sort of there. Now what really was worse is when you downloaded software and actually loaded the malware on your computer and it infected your browser, and every time you open up your browser, the stuff hits again. The funny thing is they still weren't doing a lot but being irritating back then. There was really no way of the bad guys monetizing this. So they were irritating and people wasted a bunch of money on it, but we would always get the questions, why are they doing this? And it's kind of like, well, there's not really a great reason. I think to a large degree, I think they were just sort of practicing their craft. They knew that the ability to spread computer code surreptitiously through computers would be useful someday, but they really didn't know what to do with it. You know what I mean? So they were just kind of screwing with us at the time. But that changed before too long. But before I get to that, let's see where I'm at on this thing here. Yeah, and I think what I was getting to is by the mid-2000s, we were starting to realize the error of our ways in making everyone an administrator. I know I did, and I think more companies started setting it up where users were limited permissions again, and that was working fairly well, and XP got pretty stabilized. I'd say by the late 2010s, things were fairly stable in my world. I mean, we were kind of antivirus software, endpoint security was getting better. Once we had the 5 or 6 or 7 years of people just constantly screwing up their XP computers, once Windows 7 got out and things just got better and a little bit smoother, and we didn't really have too many problems for a few years. I think users were getting more educated, more experienced as well. However, what happened that made the poo-poo hit the fan really was ransomware and Bitcoin. And that's where I think it gets interesting, and that dovetails into what's going on today. But I think, again, it might be relevant for you guys to hear the history of how that actually started. I had to do some research to get the actual history, so you may see me reading my notes a little bit on this. But the first ransomware came around in 2005. But the problem with that was it worked. You could spread it. You could encrypt the files. You could spread it around and you could ask for payment. The problem is, how are you going to get your payment? You know, take a check and you deposit in a bank account? I believe the FBI would be on top of that one, you know what I mean? So that was really the problem, was the bad guys could get their viruses out there, they could do the encryption. Now at the time, by the way, they were only doing single key encryption, which, as you know, Drew, was not super functional, but the point is they didn't have a good way to get paid that they couldn't get caught. So, you know, it was a thing, they knew it was a thing, but it really wasn't very useful. So what happened that broke that was when Bitcoin came out in 2010. Now Bitcoin wasn't worth anything back then, but it still was a cryptocurrency that was starting to get used on the dark web and all this stuff. And so they at least recognized this is a way that we can securely and anonymously receive payments. So when it really hit the fan, I think was in about 2013, Bitcoin exchanges, Bitcoin started about 9 or 10, I believe. And I believe by 13, you were starting to see Bitcoin exchanges. And just to simply explain that, I'm not going to go into a Bitcoin diatribe, but basically to explain that, that just means you can pay dollars to the exchange and buy Bitcoin, which you could then send to the bad guys as your ransom payment. So once exchanges came out, it became practical for normal people to be able to pay the ransom if something happened to them. So the first thing that happened in 2013 was this CryptoLocker virus. Drew, did y'all run into that at any point? Do you remember?
No.
Yeah. I know in 13 or 14 or 15 is when we first started seeing that thing. You would walk up to computers and they would have a big message saying your files have been encrypted. Please pay us this much in Bitcoin to get them back. Does anyone else remember seeing that back in that era? Surely some of you hit it. You're just trying to not admit it. And so in any case, here was the bottom line of what made this so bad. And I'm going to dovetail for just a second on encryption, just a really short one on encryption so you'll understand it. If you think about opening your house, you have a key, right? That key will both lock and unlock the door, okay? Well, single key encryption is the same thing. You effectively have a password. That password is used to encrypt a file, and the same password is used to decrypt a file. Now, modern security uses what's called RSA encryption, which uses a key pair. And this is something that I'm going to just explain as magic because it's complicated math and it's not worth trying to go into. What you have to do is trust and believe that very smart mathematicians have determined that you can make an algorithm such that one key opens the door and one key shuts the door, and that just works. Like I said, this is one of those things, just trust and believe it, it's true, okay? So what happens is you basically, you have these bad guys set up a key server out on the internet, the person runs the code, does whatever, it calls the web server out there on the internet, they generate a key pair and they encrypt your files with the private key, with the public key, and only the private key will decrypt it, and they have the private key. So the point is no one can decrypt it. I know when this first started happening and we started seeing it, I would see all sorts of IT guys going, let me go down, I can find a tool that'll decrypt this. I'm like, you don't understand RSA security. If you think you can fix this, you didn't read the paper on RSA security. You just don't understand the math, because you can't. And eventually people started recognizing, oh, we really can't. So in any case, the point is the system works and the bad guys were out there. Now when this first one happened, this was actually the Game Over Zeus banking Trojan. Anyone remember that word? That was the one that actually hit. And it started hitting a bunch of banks because they were going for big targets. The FBI shut them down about 7 months into their run, but the point is it let the bad guys know they're onto something that's going to work. That was really the whole point of all this. So within a few months, security researchers were finding copies of the CryptoLocker clones in the wild, and it was kind of going crazy. So I would say, in my experience, from 13 through 15, 18, something like that, we were really seeing a lot of that because we still had the problem with people doing it, making mistakes, and it would just happen. Now, the good news is if you had your files backed up, it would cost you a lot to deal with the problem, but you could deal with the problem. I mean, the notion of companies losing their data to crypto lockers and not having an air-gapped backup, that's really embarrassing. No one should have ever had that happen, you know what I mean? So whenever you hear them say, yeah, we lost everything, we had to pay the ransom, it's like, you didn't make backups, you're this big organization. So that was really kind of goofy. So while I considered it a problem, I didn't consider it an enormous problem because, again, at the end of the day, we can just restore the data on your systems. Well, that was okay, but they've changed again. And this is what the bad guys do. They constantly dovetail and move and change their game and change what they're doing. So, historically, when the ransomware guys would get in your system and encrypt all your data, what they would do is encrypt your data and then ask for a ransom, and you would either pay it or not. Once again, if you had a backup, you just pay me a lot of money to restore from backup, put everything right, make sure we don't have anything else in the system, and just say, screw those guys. here's what they're doing now. Now, they're getting in your system, they're staying in there before they hit the ransomware bomb, and they're exfiltrating your data. They're copying your data. Now what they're doing is they're basically warning you, if you don't pay the ransom, forget it if you got your data back. We've got your data. We're going to start posting your data public. And if anyone knows anything about that, if you keep personally identifying information about your clients, patients, whatever that might be, you're liable for that. You have a big liability against that. You know, anyone who's saving that kind of data has a liability to protect that data. So I always like to say the ignorance of the law is no excuse. You know, the fact that you may not know that that's a big liability you have if you're saving, you know, credit card information, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, if you're saving any of that stuff on your network, you've got a liability there that you should be aware of. So that's what they're doing now, is they're starting to threaten to exfiltrate that data. The guys are smart. They know what they're doing. So
Who is they? Is it still?
well, okay,
Eastern Europe?
that's always a good question we get here. People used to think it was a bunch of kids in their basement doing stuff like that, and it might have been at some time. But I would argue that it's every government, including ours. You know what I mean? Now, we're not ransomwaring our own stuff, but you can bet your ass we would do it against Iran if we could, or North Korea if we could, or anything like that.
I can't remember the two news articles that this happened, but I believe one of them may have been a pipeline where they went in and done the ransomware.
Yeah.
And then there was another one after that, but the terrorists wanted to get paid in cryptocurrency. And if I remember right, the FBI went in after they got everything online, and it seemed like the headlines read that they retrieved most of the money that had been paid for the ransom.
If they paid in cryptocurrency, I can't imagine how they would.
See, that's what I was getting ready to ask.
Yeah, that's a one-way irreversible transaction.
Yeah,
I can't imagine how they would.
Yeah, but it seemed like that the headlines said that they had retrieved at least part of the ransom that was paid.
I think
Yeah, the FBI did figure out a way to trace some of that. Not all, but they found.
Yeah, they had a tracking, somehow they set it up so they could track it. I think it's what I've read. Somehow the FBI knew they were gonna pay them, they were able to track it. I'm wondering down the road, somehow, as they start making them tell who all owns the crypto, if that would slow it down any.
Well, what it'll do is it'll decrease, I mean, the value of crypto goes to zero. The whole point of it is that it's anonymous. I mean, I won't have any as soon as it does that. There would be no point to. The only value of it is in the anonymity. I was going to say anonymousness.
I like anonymousness.
They don't know who the hell you are, that's what.
So again, the who's doing it, like I said, make no mistake, all of our colleges, institutions, everyone is studying this. I mean, look, there's two concepts. There's a black hat and a white hat hacker. But the bottom line is the black hat does it for, evil purposes, and the white hat does it for good purposes, but they're all doing the same thing. They're the same coders. And by the way, make no mistake, some guys have gray hats on. I guarantee you they're playing both sides of the coin, So.
What about all this autonomous stuff? Are people going to start hacking into that just for the fun of it? Hey, I'm going to speed this guy's car up from 50 to 150. Just
I wouldn't think they'd do it for the fun of it. I think they'd do it to try to take someone out.
But there's weirdos out there too that get their jollies off on it.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think that's something to consider. So in any case, I think we covered the who's doing it here. Now, I think what I'll do now is just go on to the methodologies for gaining access and talking about a few of those things because I want to lead into what you guys might want to do about it and think about it. Phishing emails and losing access to your accounts is going to be the most common way that the bad guys get in. Anyone watches TV shows and sees the hackers go and just run a little thing and hack into a system, that's very silly. That's not the way it works at all. Usually people invite the bad guys into your system. Actually, this is probably a good time to dovetail on something happened this week, and I certainly won't mention any names, but I just want to give you an example. There's a very small law firm I work for. It's one attorney and an assistant, and I did a bunch of stuff and helped them with something recently, and not the most tech-savvy people, I would say.
We have two attorneys, just to clarify. Not us.
So in any case, they called me when I was in the middle of another job with someone and said, we've got an emergency, we've got a problem. It was right after the New Year's. They hadn't turned their computer on since the holidays. They said, we got an emergency, blah, blah. I said, okay, you're my next call. I'm going to finish this call and call you right back. It took me 1 hour. My calls tend to be a long time when I'm on the phone with someone. And they called me back and said, yeah, that computer that, we did all that work on and everything, they said, yeah, we couldn't get hold of you, so we called Geek Squad and they remoted in. They said, we got viruses going back to 29 and the guy's been working on it for 45 minutes and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, who's in your system working on it? I mean, here's the thing. Feel free to do this sometime. Google Geek Squad Tech Support or you got a problem with your computer and then look at the first number that comes up. It's an ad. It's not Geek Squad. You're calling the bad guys and you're inviting them into your system. That's what she did. And this is really common. This is very normal. But yeah, you just can't do that. You just can't Google and look at the first number that Google brings up. If you even look at it, it's not the right URL. It's not even secret. This is not tricky at all. You just have to take just a tiny amount of reading. There's just. But yeah, I mean, I was just sitting there listening to her, and I'm like, yeah, you had no problem at all, really. I think her problem was Carbonite said it wasn't backing up a file or something. And so they call someone and just let them into their system immediately. So, I mean, again, I don't want to knock people for being ignorant, and I'm going to dovetail into what you need to do to keep stuff like that from happening, and for you and your employees in a second here. So back to the issue, phishing emails. Does everyone have a pretty good idea what a phishing email is? That's where, here's a simple example of it though. Someone sends you an email, said, here's a cash transfer, a bank transfer, or just whatever it is. Here's a document that you need to read. You click on the document, and it's got a link, and it says, do this. And it basically says, put in your Microsoft credentials, or your Google credentials, or your Apple credentials, or something like that. They're just trying to steal your credentials. So I think everyone's probably getting fairly familiar with that. But the question is, why is it that important? What's the big deal if they get your email? I mean, that's not cool, but is it really a big deal if someone gets access to your email? Does anyone want to answer that question before I do?
I'll give you something I've seen. I actually had PayPal come up that said that they were getting ready to pay out. I think it was, speaking of cryptocurrency, it was like $7,500 for cryptocurrency. I freaked out. Okay, so first thing I did, I called PayPal. I'm like, hey, look, don't pay that. There's no way. I've never, bought any cryptocurrency. And what they had done is they had actually accessed my email, and they had went through the PayPal, and they don't ever pay it. But what it does is if you go to PayPal, you click on that, then guess what? When you click on it, a lot of people get confused. When you click on it with PayPal, it will finish the transaction and pay it. And the PayPal people told me, said that's common. They go in and get people's email, they send that to the PayPal account because it's associated with your email, and a lot of people will click on it to go ahead and process it by accident.
So I mean, again, that's a really good example of what he's saying. So the fact that they had his email didn't compromise his finances. The fact that his email was the authentication method for his PayPal account definitely compromised finances.
I'm gonna feed off of that. I had a PayPal account set up for me at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I don't do any of that stuff because of the stuff you're talking about. We work with it at work all the time. Hugh and they always come in and test our stuff all over the place. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, I set up a PayPal account. Got an email saying, thank you for setting it up, setting this up, and immediately I saw that. It was a lot of up in the morning. I called PayPal. I did not go back through anything with it. So somewhere along the line, my email address
once again, yep,
is compromised. And I'm going to throw one other thing out. Several years ago, Equifax had a breach.
I'll probably be talking about those types of things in just a sec here real quick.
Okay. And that, my son and I, both of our accounts were hacked, and we're part of that whole thing. And I think that's coming to life now because I've been fighting for 5 months now with my son on identity theft. Having accounts set up, email addresses. I'm going to ask you a question that after a while about how to handle old email addresses and stuff like that.
So what you're saying is 2 real-world examples of where by having your email compromised, I mean, again, just think about how this goes. If you set up an account with your bank to do online banking, you give them your email address, and then you have a different set of credentials, but you give them your email address. If you forget your password, how do you reset your password? You click reset password, and where does it go? To your email.
They're watching it.
Do you really appreciate how important your email is? Your email is probably your most important asset to protect. I mean, it's as important as anything. I mean, I think that's something you really need to absorb. How important? So then basically what that's going to get down into, and actually I'm going to talk about that Equifax thing real quick. What are we looking at on time? Where are we at?
Plenty of time.
Okay. So let's talk about that Equifax thing, because this is another good example. So Equifax had some big breach, and that breach, let's just say as an example, had usernames and passwords for 100 million users. Let's say it was for Equifax directly, people who had an account to be able to log in and check their own Equifax credit score, I guess. That would be the example of what you would do, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's say that the bad guys now have a list of your email address and password for Equifax.
Did they get the social security numbers too? Didn't they?
Oh, yeah, they had everything.
They probably well did.
They
yeah.
got everything.
Yeah. So, but here's the key I'm getting at. So they have a username and password for this person, right? So do you think we can trust that that person has never used that same password on any other systems? Right? So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, well, let me just go start logging into systems that present a login page, and let me see if this email address and this password work on any other systems. You want to know how often it does? Very often, because people reuse same passwords. So, number one thing kind of out of order is just, you got to quit doing that. In one sense, you don't, because I'm going to get into the real fix to this, which is multi-factor authentication, but still, on a general principle, you really ought not reuse passwords. I finally got myself out of doing it, and there's no good, you just got to find a way to deal with it, but you need to deal with it, Now,
Alan, I inject right here. There are some really excellent password management
Oh, yeah?
products.
Yeah.
I've used RotaryofBearden for 7 or 8 years now.
So I tell you what, let's talk about password managers, because I agree and I think they're a good idea, but I have an interesting thing that I've heard on that one you might like here. So I don't use a password manager right now, but I don't use it for one and only one reason. I'm too lazy. Actually, that's not true. Let me tell you what I want out of a password manager. It's like, here's the thing. If I'm going to commit to a password manager, I want across the board, across the platform, everything, okay? So I want to know my home computer, my laptop, my office computer, my phone, my everything. All this stuff is synced up, and no matter what I do, I can use my stuff, okay? Now, I was listening to something, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago. I think it was the head tech guy at Google was having a discussion talking about password managers, and he's like, he was at first saying, don't use them, you shouldn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's, you got to be kidding me. This is a good thing, He's like, well, okay, here's the deal. If you're talking about keeping it on your computer and it doesn't sync to anything else, then that's good. He said the problem you run into is cross-platform. When the password manager's information starts crossing multiple systems, there are barriers that they can't protect. They're outside of their protection zone. So just a password manager on your computer with your stuff, they can pretty well protect everything. But as soon as you start doing what I want, which is just everything everywhere, that's where it starts getting dicey. And it's the only reason I haven't done it yet. I still think I'm going to. In that LastPass business, and again, you can always look at these things. They look like they're free. Then you look at the price, a little more expensive. Then you look at the stuff that I really want. It's fairly expensive. You said RoboForm. Oh, yeah.
I got hundreds of passwords.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know any of my passwords.
Oh, yeah, and that's really how it should be. No, that's how it should be.
Well, how does it work? Do you just know your password to get into that site?
Okay, well, let me address that really quick.
Your password to get into your password.
The correct way to do that is with a hardware. No, a hardware security key, Mike. That's what you need, like a YubiKey or something like that, or an RSA ID that little counts down every 60 seconds. Again, you got to have multi-factor authentication to your password manager. So now let's do this. Let's get into multi-factor authentication, because people know what it is. They've used it. But they might not know. There's a really simple way to explain what it is that I think you should remember in your head, okay? So multi-factor authentication is about two things. It's about something you know and something you have. That's the way to think about it. You know your password, right? But you have your smartphone, or you have an RSA token, or you have a YubiKey device. So basically what this means is if the bad guys phish your account and get your name and password, and they try to log in, it's going to ask for the second factor of authentication. They don't have that. They have what you know, they don't have what you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I would also point out, if you lose your phone, well, first of all, does everyone have a password on their phone to log into it?
Yep.
It better be a yes there.
Same color.
Hey, I'm breaking into your house tonight.
Yeah. I mean,
Just get the phone.
You got any money?
Yeah, so anyway, that's what I'm getting at. Multi-factor authentication is the best fix we have to this stuff right now. True hackers can get around almost anything, but I'm just saying, in a general sense, if you have multi-factor authentication set up, you have better protection. That's as good a protection as we can do these days in general. Now, again, it's important that you understand how to use that properly. One of the things they're doing is they're creating these authenticator apps. Google, Microsoft, everyone, LastPass, they've all got authenticator apps. One of the things that's cool that I've noticed in them is when you have a good authenticator app, you can get it just to pop up a message, and all you have to do is click approve. So, normally you get a text message and you have to read the text and type in the code, right? Everyone's familiar with that? Well, it's nice when your phone will just say, I can just log in, put in my name and password, and then get an approve, and I can just click approve, right? Well, what if that approve comes up on your phone and doesn't even require you to log into your phone to click it? You know what I mean? I think Microsoft is getting ready to change that. I think they've recognized the fallacy of the ways. It has to be hard to get logged into your system. That's just the bottom line. You cannot make it easy, otherwise you have no security. Now, I think what I wanted to get into now... Yeah, please.
Real quick for everybody, this is a general thing I do with my family. When you talked about getting into your phone, my wife hates inconvenience. So we started talking about what it means. We all now have different passwords and security codes, patterns, all this kind of stuff to get into our phones. And my family did not, and particularly my wife, did not want to do any of that stuff. So I said, here's what's happening. And she had a friend of hers that did get some of this happen to them. So tell your family. Phones are there, they're easy to get in, and most kids don't pay attention to it, but it's important to keep your phone locked down as much as your computer.
So one more thing, because I just realized I skipped one thing. So what I was getting to, this area that I was into was methodology for protecting yourself. We went into multi-factor authentication. I left out the first one, which is user education. So the bottom line is, in our business, there's a concept thing called security awareness training, and KnowBe4 is a company that's kind of the biggest. They sort of set the gold standard for this. The way it functions is like this. You actually have your IT company set up an account with KnowBe4, and you start sending out phishing emails to your own employees, quite intentionally. You start out with really simple ones, and what it does is it basically tracks who clicks on the links, who actually puts in their credentials, and it sends them back to remedial education when they do this. This is a very powerful tool. Now, what happens is after you've had it for 3, 6 months, 9 months, and you're starting to find that people are doing a little bit better, you start doing more sophisticated things. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. I'm going to give you an example with one client that it was kind of an awkward situation, but I'll tell you what I told them about it. So, we had just sent out the most recent phishing campaign, and it came from something to the effect of HR at this company. This is a big company with a couple hundred people. They came back and called us back, a day later or something. We're just freaking out that they're getting these messages from HR that people are clicking on, and it's telling them they're phishing attacks and all that. And they're like, you can't do that. You can't send out emails from HR. It's something, we can't do. And the reason, there was a legit reason. They had just recently had a company meeting warning people about what happens if you have harassment or anything like that, and asking people to send emails to HR at blah, blah, blah. But the point being, that was somewhat unfortunate timing. But my response to him was, this is exactly the type of email we need to be sending out. It's precisely the one. You can't have anything that's inherently trusted. And remind me, that's where we're going to get into a zero trust model in a minute here. But the point is, you simply cannot just categorically trust anything. When people say they want this email address whitelisted, I don't ever want it blocked. I'm like, do you know what you're saying? So you know for a fact, this person, this entity, this company will never ever send you a bad email. You just know that. Well, of course they don't know that. They just want the convenience, so I don't want this to ever get spam filtered. Not a good call. So end user education, security awareness training, I will tell anyone, if you have a limited budget on something to do with your computer systems and security, and you can either train your people or buy a security system. Train your people. 99% of the time, you have people inviting the bad guys into your system, like that story I just told you a few minutes ago. End user education is far more, you get more value for your buck than by trying to block stuff down and let people do stupid things. So, end user education, highly recommended. Okay, so the question is, where are we going right now? Well, things have changed, and they really changed in 2020 when COVID hit, for me in particular. If you think about it, for the last 20, 30 years that I've been doing this stuff, data has been a silo of data in your building behind a firewall. And we protected all of that stuff. All we were trying to protect was from the bad guys coming in from the outside and make sure the endpoint security was on the computers. But as soon as COVID hit and everyone starts working from home, now they're saying, Alan, can you just set up VPN so people can use their home computers to VPN into the office? And that's the home computer that your teenage kid uses to do what? You want me to VPN in? That VPN is putting that computer on your corporate network. We've spent a lot of time and money protecting these corporate systems that are all behind the firewall. We didn't do anything to that home computer. It doesn't meet standards. It's who knows what's going on with that. But that's what was going on. So then that basically gets around to, and by the way, now we don't even have silos of data behind a firewall now, because now all the data's moved to the cloud. So really the question is, how do we protect things moving forward in this kind of new world that we live in, where your smartphone can access your data, your iPad can access it, any computer, home computer, anything can access your data. What do we do about that? How do we protect that when we don't have our hands on everything? The good news is there's an answer. The bad news is you're not going to like it. And it's the concept of a zero trust model. And you can probably imagine, to some degree what that means. You don't trust anything. And let's think about this one more time. So if I had a file server historically, and I set up users on the system, normally all the users are going to have access to the file server. I mean, you may restrict an HR folder or a whatever management folder, but other than that, if it's data everyone shares, everyone has access to it. And that means anyone can just delete that data. Now again, you have backups and all that stuff. Drew, did y'all ever have anyone do that in the days where people first started to use mouse, where they would take a mouse and inadvertently click a folder and move it somewhere else?
Extremely fortunate.
Yeah.
We only hire very smart people.
In the early 2000s, in the early 2000s, that happened with law firms all the time. When these assistants were first learning to use a mouse, they would just click and drag a folder, and Windows would just move it. And it doesn't ask, it doesn't confirmation, it would just move the folder. So it was there, but you had to go find it. So in any case, the point is, you generally speaking trusted the users who were employees of your companies. You generally speaking trusted the computers that were in your office. It's just there was this sort of trust by default. You know what I mean? The modern zero trust model is just say don't trust anything, validate and verify everything. I'm going to read just a little bit. I'm not going to read too much about it, but zero trust is a framework for requiring users, whether outside the organization's network, to be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated for security configuration and posture before being granted access or keeping access to applications and data. Mike, that sounds like something you want, doesn't it?
Now, Alan says, he says, I got a cure, you're just not going to like it. It's just going to be real hard for you to get to your own stuff. So do you want security, or do you want it easy to go to work?
Well, that's exactly, yeah, and I'll tell you, we're going to get to the security and convenience in one more second. I'll be winding up here. But the point is, again, that if you start seeing in modern systems that you are prompted for authentication multiple times or to double check that you really wanted to do something, that's the way things are going, and it's an inevitable march toward that. There's no way around it. So my point is you should make your peace with multi-factor authentication, being asked multiple times about things, and you should try to find a way to like it, because they're trying to protect your data. And once again, you may have data about your clients, and you may have a big liability you're not even thinking about. Mike, are y'all doing cyber liability insurance policies yet?
Yes.
Yeah, and
I mean, there's a lot of difference between ransomware, data breach, data identity recovery, and the law holds folks, and I don't know the law, and they have someone who does. And it's hard to get a handle on the risk. Insurance policies are not rubber stamped like many homeowners are. The coverage for this must be read and understood. Good luck with that. Your local independent insurance agent struggles to understand it, and his tech man says, yeah, that's just real weird. So, and some of the coverage, like ransomware, you buy $1 million of it, but if you read the policy, it's on a reimbursement basis. So you got $1 million handy to pay the ransom guy, and then wait on the insurance company to reimburse it. So, It's still a new field.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. I got one more thing I'm going to say about that, but I'm coming to my conclusion here. So conclusion is, for individuals, use multi-factor authentication wherever available. If it ever asks you, let me say this, my bank, it took them a while to finally start doing multi-factor authentication, and every time I log in, it says, do you want to remember this computer so you don't have to do this again? I'm like, no, I don't want to remember this computer. Of course I don't. I want to use it every single time. I want the pain of multi-factor authentication. I want it not to ask me that, is what I want. But they want to do it because they want the convenience. They know their customers are going to get mad at them if they make it hard to get into their bank, and that's a mistake on the customer's end. Okay, so multi-factor authentication is critical. Just learn to like it. Avoid reusing the same passwords. Now again, if you have multi-factor authentication, you could make an argument that you could use the same password everywhere because they still can't get in. But you probably just ought to get in the habit of not doing that. And then the last one, this is just sort of a general thing. Just don't trust anything on the computer, the web, the email. It's all trash. Every single bit of it. All of it. Full stop. Okay. And then for businesses, so here's the important one for businesses, and Micah, hopefully you'll appreciate this one. Literally, whenever we get this question from people, I say start with a good cyber liability insurance policy for a couple of reasons. I can't possibly protect against everything that can happen. You've got to have some sort of insurance against this. The other thing is the insurance policy typically will give you some sort of a questionnaire as to what you're doing. The short answer is you're not doing any of it, and you tell them that, and they'll either say, well, we're not going to rate you because you're so bad, or they'll say, here's the low-hanging fruit, here's the things you need to do, and we'll rate you. So the point is the insurance policy and the questionnaire will lead you into what you really need to be doing in terms of doing it in order. I mean, we could just throw endless money at the problem, but the question is, what is the order? So insurance policy first, then start ticking off the low-hanging fruit second. I would remind people to minimize your liability exposure by not storing personal identifying information if you don't need to. I mean, if you receive information from people and you don't need to keep that for the future, delete it, trash it, get rid of it. It's actively in your interest to get rid of that data. Lastly, accept that you're a target. There will be cost involved in protection, and there's nothing you can do to avoid it. And you can't purchase protection. You have to implement systems. A lot of the stuff in this type of compliance is about policies and procedures that you do internally. It's not about buying IT products and services from me. It's about things you do internally with data that you touch. Closure, security is not convenient, and convenience isn't secure.
I spent 22 years in retail. We got audited twice a year. And the first thing the auditor would do when she came into the stores we were at, she would look at the management, go into the computer, and it wasn't a question of whether or not she hacked into the computer emails. It was a question of how much. 5 minutes was the actual average time she hacked into every one of the managers in the stores I was at. And I never, ever got audited that she didn't know every one of them. Less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, so
that's convenience for a password.
So pen and paper, guys, pen and paper. Quit using computers.
I always do that.
Got a book for me?
I do. Thank you, Alan.
Do what?
Book we've got is You Have a Voice.
I don't use pens. I don't know how to use this equipment here. What is this thing?
Speak it.
You know, I think we made the right decision, David. Even though we were questioning at the time, it was Peyton or Alan, and we knew that Alan would be the hit. So we went with Alan. And we told Peyton to just go somewhere else. I think he's in downtown Rotary.
There you go.
Let's see. Oh, you about made me forget.
Oh, yeah.
Parting gift.
Oh, yeah.
This can you put on your computer.
It's analog.
Or your stack of papers. Thanks, Alan. That was actually good.
Unexpected.
I just wonder at some point if things will get better. The one issue I had that's like we got cyber insurance, but the price is keeps going up, and we have one issue. They've said we got to do one thing, and we're still trying to figure out if we can realistically do it. But anyway.
But you agree, I mean, conceptually, you'd like to just say you do everything on the lift, but it's just not possible or practical or cost effective. So you've got to do the low hanging fruit that they want you to do. And
Well, we were fortunate, we do most of it, and we've got some pretty good procedures, but we had to get into a discussion because they were wanting 3 things done. One we were already doing, one we convinced them that we were okay on, and the third one we're sort of working with that is sounding reasonable, but it ends up having to have dual authentication for every single person. And our issue would be the iPad sitting with the drivers and the sales guys, and doing the dual authentication on that kind of gets kind of crazy. So, and there's a very low risk from actually getting hacked. We've got some.
There's a cost to this disruption to having to log in every, something, in that case, every stop.
Well, you've also got the issue, we'd have to pay so much dollars per each iPad, and there's something, we're down to the one issue. They went through it and said, we're giving you insurance, you got 2 months to get these issues resolved, and we're down to the one, and I got like 16 more days.
Put it off. Put it off.
Well, I don't really do it. It's outside my expertise. I work under the theory that if I get an email and I don't respond to you, that meant that I wasn't if you have me clicking on something, I may or may not do it, because if I'm clicking on something, I'm thinking 2 or 3 times before I actually do it, especially if it's going to the business, because I just can't afford to get hit.
Hey, Jim, fire your insurance company. Serious. If they get that anal about it and they can't insure you, you need to find somebody to do it.
Well,
Some of this stuff gets so ridiculous. I've dealt with adjusters; they're ridiculous, and they get to the point. Well, for example, this is what really, we don't mean to take anybody's time with that. Visa, MasterCard. You know this PCI DSS compliance, right?
yeah.
So you put in tokenization of every single credit card in your entire organization, and you still fill out that stupid questionnaire. You do this, you do that, you didn't answer that one correctly, then you're going to pay $20 per terminal for every terminal in your business from now on, because you can't be perfect. Well, let's see. Target wasn't perfect. Who else got hacked, right? They had all this stuff out there. And you're paying basically an insurance policy to Visa for stuff that you have never gotten on your network. Those card numbers are encrypted and tokenized from the moment you put that card in. And there's no way that you're going to lose somebody's card number because it's not on your system. But yet they still charge you that fee every single month. It's thousands of dollars a year.
To answer credit, Drew, if we have to do what I said, we won't do it. We're seeing if there's a way to do what they're asking for and anyway, it gets into IT stuff.
You try, but.
Yeah, and if we can't, we'll go back to them and say we can't, and.
Hey, let me say one thing real quick, and I don't know if you can do this on the iPads, but just so people understand with the hardware tokens, like the YubiKeys, the cool thing about the way they work from an end user standpoint is you have a hardware key, so I can use it to log into my Windows computer. You plug in the key, it already knows who you are, and you just put in a PIN, and then you touch it to physically show that you're present at the site. Yeah. Now, I won't go into a long thing on that, but the point is I can imagine an iPad having one of those keys, and then you just put in a PIN and touch it, make sure you're there, and that's 2-factor authentication, but it's not complicated.
Yeah, well, our iPads is not having custom. Really, the only risk is where they somehow get into it and then get into our. We don't do credit cards, so. But we're getting off the subject. Anyway, any other discussion or anything else that if anybody wants to ask Alan, you be here after the meeting for a few minutes.
I'm running out as quick as I can.
Okay. Never mind. Anyway, any other items of discussion before I call the meeting? All right, 4-way test. Do we have Smokey?
Oh, he didn't make it up. 4-way test. Things say and do. First, true. Second, it's a fair officer. Third, with a little friendship.